Hey everybody, welcome to episode 42 of the Go Get Outside podcast. This is your host, Jason Milligan. Welcome back. Welcome aboard. If you're a previous listener, if you've been listening to the last few episodes, you know that Erica and I have been traveling across the U.S. Well, we are back. The 8-week trip is over. As part of that road trip, we stopped to meet various people in different states to talk to them for this podcast. And on today's show, we have Jeannine Tidwell, who is one of those people who invited us into her home so we could record this episode. Jeannine Tidwell is a co-founder of Twin Eagles Wilderness School in Sandpoint, Idaho. They teach wilderness and survival skills, but they also focus on more than that, particularly reconnecting people with nature and their community and their culture, and also teaching mentoring and helping people move from different stages of their life and making nature a part of their lifestyle as opposed to just an occasional hobby. So on today's show, we'll be discussing the history behind Twin Eagles Wilderness, but also the philosophy behind the school, along with a variety of other topics that focus on our relationships with ourselves, with others, with society as a whole, and with nature. So let's go speak to Jeannine Tidwell.
I'm Jeannine Tidwell. I live in Sandpoint, Idaho. It's a very pristine area. It's a little bit off the beaten path. We have this really beautiful lake here called Lake Pend Oreille that is the home of all kinds of fish. I like to think of the lake as the heart of this place, the blood, the lifeblood of Sandpoint. And eagles nest here year-round, and the osprey come here in the summertime. So they're always fishing in that lake. It's really awesome to see them. And I've lived here for 12 or 13 years. It's been really a precious experience to raise my two sons here, River and Forrest. They're 7 and 10 years old. And my husband and I run a school here. It's called Twin Eagles Wilderness School. And we help people rekindle their relationships with nature, with themselves in new and unique ways, and with other people, with their families and communities. And in the bigger picture, we're restoring culture through what we do. I see in this modern world, there's a lot of frayed threads in the tapestry of culture. So what we're doing is reweaving those threads back in so they're not frayed out. And it's pretty necessary for the times that we're living in right now. This is a very exciting time, and things are happening really fast and changing really fast. And I think it's really important that we slow down. Hurry up so we can slow down. That's kind of what's happening. That's the orientation. Even with myself, I catch myself. Hurry up so I can slow down and relax. And relaxation is like one of the hardest things to achieve sometimes.
Yeah, our creations as people, our technological creations and everything else have kind of reached a point where they're beginning to outpace our ability to maintain the same momentum that they are following.
That's really
They've kind
well
of
said.
bypassed us.
Mm-hmm. But it's beautiful. I mean, here we are able to do this right now.
Right,
Have this connection. And if it weren't for this technology, we wouldn't have people being able to reach out and hear it too.
Right. There's definitely the good sides and then the bad sides, and it's balancing those sides and trying to find that middle ground, I think. So you mentioned the school, and you talked about that a little bit and your frayed threads analogy. So let's just jump right into that then. Explain to everyone what Twin Eagles Wilderness School is. There are many types of schools, and I imagine a lot of people aren't really sure what a wilderness school does.
There's a lot of different kind of schools out there. Survival schools where you just learn straight skills. And we do some of that here. Next weekend, we're actually going to have a weekend rendezvous with teens where they come and they practice all kinds of skills, making fire in all kinds of different ways, or building shelters, working with edible and medicinal plants. So we do offer all that in the way of learning. And then there's also mentoring. So mentoring I see is the glue that kind of holds all learning together. Mentoring is this really intimate exchange between two people. And when it's happening at its best, it's invisibly facilitated. So it doesn't even seem like it's happening. There's this teacher or mentor, but their identity maybe doesn't even have this always a strong form in front, like I'm teaching you. So at its best, it's a little more sleight of hand, and that's what we're trying to do. We're actually trying to get out of the picture in a way, so that the student owns the learning. So we do all kinds of classes in just mentoring, workshops in just mentoring. And then there's the cultural restoration piece that I mentioned. That could take anything from bringing back age-old rites for people as they move from one life stage to another. We've led rites of passage for people moving from adolescence into young adulthood, or from young childhood to middle childhood, or from adulthood, or what seemed like a young person was already an adult, into true adulthood and service to community. There actually are rituals and ways, life ways of doing that beyond or in addition to getting a high school diploma. That's one way, or getting a driver's license. These are actually marker points in the modern culture, but there are earth-based ways of doing that too. Having a young person be witnessed and say, we see you and your competency level is increasing. You're becoming more independent, and now it's time to become interdependent. So we facilitate those kinds of things too, hopefully mostly invisibly, as uncles or aunts or cultural engineers, so to speak, bringing back something from a culture that is kind of lost on us, because our culture is a little bit of an orphan. Like I would consider the modern culture kind of a young culture, parentless in a way, compared to other cultures they're much older, like China. Is a very old culture where they have extended family and multiple generations involved in the youth growing up. Here we're bringing that back. And I think that's happening in other places too, in our country too, and that's exciting. It's not just happening here. Another way that it happens is through extended family and adoption. So there's people, after having lived here a certain time length, and actually kindling these relationships. And a lot of these relationships happen in nature, in the context of nature, where it's not just everyday life, it's the challenge, the fire and the challenge and the tests of weather and being out in nature when who knows what's going to happen, right? It's a little unpredictable being out in nature with other people and learning who are we when a storm comes in, right? So over the time, over years and years and years of being with people like that over and over and over again, same people, there becomes this extended family feeling that I can actually look at somebody and say, oh, you're my older sister. I've had that with a few people in this community through what we do. And we've actually sat down and said, oh, you are my older sister. Yeah, so now we're going to make an agreement that we're always going to be here for each other. So it's a way of stepping into a conscious relationship compared to not having a conscious intention in my relationships and just saying, oh, I'll see you around. Cultural restoration really is about restoring relationships and putting them back into the conscious playing field of who we are and what we want and who we want to relate with. And it's not necessarily about being picky and choosy either, but seeing who shows up and then how do we bring them in a conscious way.
So what I'm hearing is it is a school where there is some sort of curriculum and it teaches, but it's also a part of a larger community. So as opposed to just, hey, come sign up for whatever course, it's about becoming part of something larger than that. So how does somebody go about becoming a student here or a member of this school?
Well, for all intents and purposes, on the surface, it looks like a person would sign up for a program. But I've definitely had other people who didn't necessarily do that, and so they wanted to come and they wanted to volunteer. They wanted to just hang out. I've known somebody for like 10 years who did that. They just kept coming around. And before you know it, there they were, right in the center of things. And so sometimes that happens too. And sometimes it happens, like just last week, a woman who's a friend of mine came to me and she said, I'd really like you to work with my son. He's not necessarily going to probably do a program, but then we arranged how would we get together and how would he come in and just be a part of things. That's where I think that extended family adoption comes in. It doesn't, relationships are happening in this culture so quickly, so fast. So in this case, it doesn't always happen really fast. It might take years to have a relationship built and have something stable to it. Indigenous people are a classic example of that. It takes a long time to build relationships with Native people, and for good reason. Why? And they're moving on a much more circular way of time, not linear, with a destination right at the beginning, the way I think modern cultures is running. So it takes time, I think. And here we invite that taking time. Like for a whole vision to unfold, it might take months or years to see something to fruition. It's just like the fruit on a tree. It takes all these cycles of seasons for something to become ripe. And that's how it is for relationships too. And I think we're in a time now where we need to be outside and connecting with nature as much as possible. That's really at the heart of our school, is that, nature connection actually alone is not enough, though. We actually need to connect with others in nature too. I think that's paramount right now in our times. I mean, I could go outside and that is valuable and peaceful, nourishing, but actually having a whole culture come outside is where we need to be headed in the big picture. That's kind of what's behind what we do. We not only want to get people outside, but we want people to deepen in a place too. So it's not about being a tourist, checking out here and there. I got outside. I went hiking along this trail. It was awesome. But do we know the subtle nuances of a place? How many times have I been there? And so the best place, I think, to start is right outside a person's door. So when I go outside, I do my best to become acquainted with all the species that are right here, the plants that are right here. I mean, I gather plants from right here at this place for herbs and medicine, making medicines and things. It's really important to know the trees right where we live. And then there's just a host of other species that are right outside our door. And I'm pretty convinced that outside doesn't have to be a drive out to a wilderness area. The term wilderness school might be a little deceiving, actually, because I really think that nature is right outside a person's door. I've been to places in town where I've had friends who live right in town in Sandpoint. I live a little bit in the woods, but I've been right in town and seen the most amazing things right outside some of my friends' places. And I've said, hey, let's gather that right here. That's medicine food right there.
I think you bring up something that we kind of forget, which you're saying nature doesn't have to be like wilderness. It doesn't have to be this separate thing. To a large degree, we've kind of forgotten that nature is everything around us and that we come directly from it. And so we can't escape from it. It's there. We just can ignore it. So it's about choosing to stop ignoring it and recognizing it as part of all existence and your own life.
It's right here, too. I mean, when you came in and I was showing you where I live, it's right here. I mean, this ceiling, it's white pine, and it comes right from nearby here. The wood was harvested. So it's really, it starts from right here where we're standing even. One of my visions is to live in a time and place, and it could just be a room. Maybe it would start with a room, or maybe it would start with just right here where I'm sitting. Everything I interact with, I would know the origins of it. I would know where it came from, or I would have some kind of a relationship with it. It wasn't just a couch I bought. I mean, it has to start somewhere. That's a really big picture. But that would be amazing, I think, is if we could make a start, each one of us, at just starting to know where things come from.
So explain why you think that is an important thing.
Because otherwise, we're kind of alien. We're kind of aliens walking through life, not really having a connection with the very basic ingredients, of living. Like, it could start as simple as the meal I ate and where did that food come from? And then beyond that, it could be, well, what about the plate that held my food? And I just think that it's really important that we have a relationship with that. Otherwise, we're really living one more step disconnected from the most essential knowing of our physical world. We're talking about nature. We're saying it's really important to connect with nature. So rather than feel like it's a project where I got to go drive and go camping and pack up all my gear for it, and I got to go on this big hike and get everything together for it, and I even put it on the calendar and I scheduled it in advance, what I'm saying is it could be every day. It could be the very water that came out of my faucet. I know that it would come from a well. And I could tell you where that water is generated from. Or it could be, if I lived in town, it could be I know where that water comes from, even if it's coming through a sink. I think that's really important that we know the origins of everything, because if we know the origins of things, then we know our place in the world.
To a certain degree, it's almost like a difference between making something a hobby versus a lifestyle. It's
Right.
like nature can be a hobby, and then you can continue to be distanced from it when you're not participating in that hobby, or you can find a way to work it into your entire lifestyle. So it's no longer making time for it. Time for it is always.
That's right, every moment. And I think it can happen in this modern context. I think it's totally possible that it could happen in this modern context too.
We are getting quite philosophical for the What is Your Wilderness School discussion.
Oh, I didn't mean to.
No, I think it's great because basically what we've done now is then explained why people would want to be part of a wilderness school. It's nice to know it's not just, hey, come get this skill so you can learn how to start a fire, but that there is an entire philosophy and a lifestyle behind it and this communal aspect that you're helping build. What sort of people have been coming to you to become students? Does it tend to be people who are local, or are there people traveling across country, across continents to get here to come take courses?
I would say it's been a little of everything. Definitely there's a local community here, which is awesome. People definitely come here from other states to come and participate too.
And what do they usually come to do? Do they usually come to do a number of courses? Do they stay for a week? Do they stay for a month?
Usually they might stay for a summer or for 9 months. We have run in the past an immersion program where people come for 9 months to study, kind of like a college level course. Sometimes if they stay for a summer, they're coming as an intern or an apprentice. Sometimes people come for 9 months as an apprentice or even a whole year as an apprentice. There are local people who come just for a weekend, and also there could be a week. There's a week-long courses that we do. At first, it seems like people are coming because they want to learn skills or they want to be connected with nature. And then what I usually see happen is nature becomes a mirror for a person to start to see themselves. The more time a person spends outside, and if it's quality time spent outside, then nature becomes a mirror for them to start to see who they are. More often than not, my adult students, I see that the skills of connecting with nature, like survival skills or primitive skills or earth-based living skills, there's all kinds of different terms to it, that kind of, it still stays there, but sometimes it goes into the backdrop, and people then want to do all kinds of things like inner work because they really want to develop themselves internally more, or they want to create these things for other people. You know, they want to step into service and become a mentor and give back because they feel like they got so much from it. That's usually the journey I see a person take. Is it starts with the physical. I want to learn how to become more self-reliant, or I want to connect with nature. And the deeper a person journeys, it usually becomes an inner journey and not just an outer journey. And I think that's a really natural thing as a person matures. And I can't think of a better place than nature to help a person mature.
I think it's interesting that you say a lot of people come and then eventually they want to become mentors. That's something I've noticed in life in general, that when someone finds something that really answers a lot of questions for them or like generates a new passion for them, it usually opens up some sort of desire to then share that with other people and then help other people find that as well. It's almost as if as soon as some person finds this thing that enriches their life, it like rips away some selfishness and then makes them want to share in somewhat a selfless way this task with other people.
Yeah, I think of that as real altruism. There's a lot of ways in which nature helps us cultivate things like qualities like empathy. Just the aspect of listening in nature gets us not just always listening to our own tape that's going on, our own storytelling that's going on, our own script. Birds are a classic example of that. When you go out and you actually listen to the birds, when I go out and I listen to the birds, it gets me out of my own thinking. And I'm developing empathy by hearing what is going on for them out there. The same for tracking and same for relating with anything out in nature like trees or plants. I mean, really, anytime I stop and imagine what it's like for a plant to have its whole life live, and then all of a sudden there I am taking it, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. And so that's developing empathy. And so that's what I'm hearing you're talking about there. Nature's the ultimate teacher for bringing a person to a place of empathy and truly being helpful, being of service, wanting to have happiness. Nature actually is that catalyst for that. And then that's what I see. Yeah, people usually want to take that next step beyond themselves. They want to live for a purpose beyond self. But purpose for self is not a bad thing either. I think that there's a natural maturing and taking ownership and personal responsibility that I see people who come out into nature happens through wanting to learn about being self-reliant, things like that. There actually is this self-ownership and taking responsibility for oneself that is part of the journey too. I mean, it's really important to say, I'm going to take responsibility for myself rather than pass it off and expect someone else to take care of me all the time.
I like that you've mentioned that because it's actually a big point with me too. One of the things I think as a society, definitely in this country, we need to learn more of is personal responsibility. Mm-hmm. Like we should absolutely find ways to work together and compromise and all these other things. But your first response to any predicament should be to look at your responsibility there and not someone else's. And I think if we all started there, we'd find a lot more solutions to problems a lot more efficiently and a lot more effectively. So one thing I'd really like to talk about now, because we kind of looped into it naturally, we're talking about how people come to your courses and then eventually they want to start mentoring other people. At some point in life, this happened to you because you decided not only do I want to share these things with other people, but I want to build an organization that allows me to share this with other people. Let's go way back to before this school existed and talk about how and why this school now exists.
Well, I'm only one part of the story, so my husband is not here to tell his experience with it. But what happened for me was when I was in my young years, when I was 13 or 14, I had an awakening where I realized that I needed a mentor. And I won't get into all the details of the story, but I was called, without realizing it, to find a mentor. And so there was an opportunity came where I found a mentor. And I would say, honestly, he saved my life because he did get me actually connecting with the plants, and he helped me become self-aware. And so he pretty much impressed a path upon me that I could do anything, that I could do anything. So he was my mentor for 5 or 6 years, all through my teen years. And when I was 18, his name was Richard Hill. He came to me when I was 18 and he said, "So what are you going to do with your life?" So I told him at that time, I want to create a learning environment where people can come and learn about everything that could possibly be learned in the universe. And that's what I told him. And he said, "That is wonderful. I give you my blessing." And so I went off and I had said I was going to do that. And I didn't really know what that was really going to be.
Yeah, because that's a very broad category to begin with.
Yeah, it was really big and grand and included everything in a way. And that was just that was the power it had to have, with saying it in that way. And I actually even had a book. I was writing things down in it for the first couple of years after I had named this for myself. And there were people who even told me, "Oh, you're ahead of your time," or "The world wouldn't even be able to know how to have space for that." And I just stayed with that. And then somewhere in me, I forgot that I'd said this. And I think this just can happen because right now we're getting a very in-depth training in learning how to be distracted, learning how to pay attention to things that aren't really important, and all kinds of things that are happening in this modern culture. So I was a little bit of a product of that. And I honestly just forgot all about this vision statement that I had said at the time. And I don't even know where the book went. Some years went by and I was at a crossroads where I was working at a school as an assistant. I had read some books by Tom Brown, who runs a survival school over in Asbury, New Jersey. He was writing all kinds of things in those books about a person not living their vision is a person who's not living at all, and the value of really connecting with nature as our umbilical cord to being on the planet. That's kind of how I read it. And so I realized that I'm on a planet and I don't even know what planet I'm on. That's how it felt as I was reading this. And I realized, wow, I actually need to know this planet I'm on in order to live on it. And so I was actually offered a teaching job right at that moment when I finished reading some of his books. And I turned it down because I knew that I wanted to just go check out his school. I went through 5 or 6 years of in-depth training with all kinds of people all over the country and working with indigenous people and trackers and teaching and mentoring. And then I came back full circle to remembering that I had said that I had said, oh, I want to create a learning environment where people can learn about everything they could possibly be learning in the universe. I went back to college and I finished getting a degree because that was a loose thread for me that I don't want to have like loose threads hanging around, and I like to complete things. So when I went back, my advisor at this college I went to, Prescott College, it's a really, really well-known liberal arts college in Arizona, and my advisor's name was Jeannine. And she sat down with me and she said, so what's your vision and what's your story? And she asked me some very key questions the way a mentor would ask. That was the portal that opened up my remembering all the way back that I'd said this, that this is what I was going to do. And then I had other key mentors too who helped guide me to see, oh, this is the form that it could take. Then this school was born because I realized, oh, that's what it is. What I was saying, I want to offer a place where people could come and learn about the whole universe. What I really was saying was nature. And so in a way, I was calling myself into something that I wanted too. I kind of see callings aren't just things that we want to give to others, calling ourselves into service, but we actually need that which we feel called into just as much as we want to give it to somebody else. So I needed that too.
So how did you decide, let's go to Sandpoint, Idaho, and build it here in the woods next to a field of wild turkeys, which we did see on the way here. That's why I mentioned
them. I see them in certain seasons. Fall is usually the season.
They're all just hanging out, and we drove down White Mountain, I believe it is. Mm-hmm. So what made you come to Idaho? I don't think we've mentioned, where did you originally grow up?
Well, I grew up in the desert Southwest.
Okay, so
southern Utah, southern Nevada.
So then you made your way up here. What brought you here and made you decide the school should be here?
Well, we traveled all over the country, and we had visited a lot of different wilderness schools and worked at some of them too, and helped out at some of them. And there was actually some people who said, oh, come here and start a school here. But when we came to Sandpoint, there was a certain magic here that we could feel, and there were certain omens. You know, on the very day that we came here, it was raining intensely. And right as you come in and you're driving across that long bridge, I don't know if you went across there, there's this big rainbow that was there. And we saw the eagles, and there had been a storm. And if you actually look at our logo, all of that is in the logo right there. The rainbow, the storm, the eagles. All of that was kind of an omen and a sign communicating this is the place. And then being in the town for a while, we actually met certain key people that affirmed that. And we actually asked really tangible, grounded questions too. What is this town comprised of so far? Where is this place headed and going? But I really think deep down that nature communicates in a lot of different ways, you know, through signs and symbols and pictures and images. And so nature, in a way, communicated that for us, that this is the place. And we've really felt connected to this place. So what we said actually when we first moved here was we would just live here for a year and just check out the area, see and experience it without doing anything. And that's what we did. And that was a good confirmation to see that we would do it here or not.
And what did you find out in that year that you stuck around?
Well, the first year was really hard, actually, because we didn't actually know a lot of people. As I said, relationships take time. Not just with people, but with the place. It's taken a lot of time, many years, to feel like I could really be here. And even now, it's still a journey. I mean, I'm changing every day. And the other thing that I would say about the first year was that lots of synchronicities happened too. And synchronicity to me is a way of saying, yes, you're in the right place at the right time. All is right in the world. All is right with you and your path. So a lot of synchronicities happened too that kind of affirmed this is good.
So one thing I'd like to hear about, if you move to a town and you say, I'm going to start a laundromat. It's not easy to do, but everyone knows what a laundromat is. Once you get a storefront and you set up the laundromat, people know what that means, and they stop and they put in their quarters and they wash their clothes and they leave, and you're successful or you're not successful. A wilderness school is a much less common thing. So appearing in a place where you originally didn't live and deciding to start a school of this type, probably not the easiest thing to do. So how did you go about doing that?
We started by meeting people. We checked out all different kinds of places. Like I went to the farmer's market, and I went to the library and asked about the homeschool families in the area, people who are kind of progressive maybe, and even being around in town, seeing certain familiar faces and connecting with people, going to the health food store and meeting people there. And no, it's not the easiest thing in the world. And really what I'd love to see in the world, and I think that here in this place, we do it day by day, that connecting with nature would be as common as the laundromat or the dojo, the karate place in town. Nature would be that easy and accessible and fun to connect with. But really, I still see actually that it's hard to make time for that. I mean, I'm talking about on a big scale. I'm talking about like on the whole planet. That's hard for us as humans, I think, to make time to connect with nature, because it's not necessarily a life way anymore. It's not a way of living anymore for this modern culture. For other cultures, yeah, there are definitely still cultures who are very deeply connected with their place because they have to. They have to because it's a necessity. So now, our modern culture, we're not connecting with nature because it's not a necessity.
Yeah, I think one of the mistakes we made as society is, so there are all these dangers in nature that we have to protect ourselves from. And we spent so much time finding ways to do that we forgot to stay connected to it. And so it became a thing to fear and to protect your family from. And then now we live inside buildings separated from it, and it's an other. And it's like we talked about earlier, it's easy to forget that it's around you and you're still part of it. And I do think that we're trying to start to swing back the other direction. And your school is probably one of those examples. When people tell you, you said people told you there's no place in society for this, it's not ready for it, that's actually the time
to do
when
it.
Those things should be occurring, because that means you're on that leading edge, seeing what's coming.
That's right. And I love where I live because there's so much local food happening here. We are changing that. And it's not just here, but because I live here, I can speak about it. Here, there are lots of people who are into local food, who want to grow their own food, who want to do animal husbandry and all kinds of things. It's awesome. And just about a month ago, I was at this gathering called the Permaculture Convergence. It was over in Spokane, and it was this convergence of all these people who are trying to live like that. They actually want to make a connection with a place, and they want to help connect other people with nature, and they want community around that. They actually want to create community in the context of connecting with nature. And it might come in different expressions and forms for all these different people. But it was really exciting to see that. Like, wow, all these people are coming together because we're all wanting the same thing. And it was awesome to see the diversity of it, too. So I think we are making a comeback, and it's going to happen one person at a time, and one community or one place at a time, one town at a time. I'm kind of on a longer plan. Like, I may not see all of the changes that are happening now come to their fullest fruition in my lifetime. I'd like to envision that my children's 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 children will get to see that, what we're doing now, those seeds of what we're doing now, and what all the people all over the planet are doing now to make a difference, that those seeds will be sprouting And the roots will become these deep tap roots to stabilize the soil for several years from now, hundreds of years from now. That's what I'm envisioning.
There may be some people listening right now who are thinking, oh yeah, I'm kind of scared of nature. I kind of stay outside of nature. And we've talked in these really wide, kind of broad ideas. What are some steps you would tell people, like, look, if you want to take some steps to reconnect yourself with nature and start trying to take steps towards living your life a more integrated way with everything around you and not just with the technology that's available to you, what are some just initial steps you would recommend people take to start doing that?
The first one would be to go outside every day and have a practice of sitting at least 20 minutes outside. And maybe you don't go that far. Maybe it's just on your porch. Sitting there, no matter whether it's raining, whether it's snowing, whether it's cold, whether it's warm, it's sunny, it's too hot. All of these things are meant to make us have to stretch a little, like weather and temperature and being alone on the porch. We're in a time now where there could be anxiety for a person being alone, actually. It might be hard for a person to be with themselves. Different times of day even, That's the one practice I would offer a person would be to go outside every day, 15, 20 minutes a day, and just sit. See what it's like to be outside, sit still, and observe your surroundings. And it's called a practice for a reason, because we do it consistently. And if we do that, if a person does that, then we start to see the results of that later. It may not come right away. I mean, I've had this practice where after doing it weeks, then I saw a fawn in the grass I never noticed before. And certain birds fly over, and there's certain patterns, even in the midst of a totally human-habited place. There is nature happening. And so there are patterns taking place for birds and plants and weather and all kinds of things. And I think that kind of practice of sitting outside 15 to 20 minutes every day will actually recondition our senses and the brain. We'll actually reorient and direct our brain to start patterning on nature. We have to make space for that. So I'm not saying for an hour or 2 hours or go camping. I'm saying go sit outside for 15, 20 minutes every day and see what happens. Allow something of a discovery to take place.
So right now, someone's listening and they're doing that thing that we do as humans when we hear something that sounds kind of uncomfortable and we kind of want to do it, but we kind of don't want to do it. And they're starting to look for excuses. And so someone right now listening is saying, oh, I can't make 20 minutes to just sit and do nothing. What would you tell that person?
Go out for 5. I'd say start with 5 minutes then and put it on the watch. Put it on your clock. Go out for 1. If you can't do 5, go out for 1 minute then. So after I had kids, I started to realize the value of what I call baby steps. And I'm a big believer in baby steps now. If you can't do 1 minute, go out for 30 seconds.
And then maybe just push it a little more each day.
Exactly.
And I would also posit this, which if you tell yourself, oh, I don't have 20 minutes in a day for this, look at the time you've apportioned throughout the day and then really reevaluate how you're using that time. Because there is some point in your day that you are squandering 20 minutes. I don't care how busy you are. I don't care how important you are. There is some point in your day where you are squandering 20 minutes that you could use better.
It could also happen when a person's at work and they take a lunch break and they go sit outside for 5 minutes for their lunch break. It takes a little bit of discipline too. If we want to see something change, then we have to do something different. But I think it's possible. And I've seen a lot of benefits from people, including myself, taking a practice like this on. It's what we call sit spot. Just go out and find a spot where you can sit. And if really, you don't have to go too far. It could just be right on your porch.
So we're talking about how you can take steps to change things. And we earlier were talking about students who have come here and stayed for long periods of times and things like that. Is there any story or person that jumps to mind of someone who came here and the change you saw in that person from when they first arrived until they completed whatever curriculum or whatever path they were following was so drastic that it really left an impact, or maybe made you think, okay, this was worth making this school if more things like this are going to happen?
Well, there's a lot of students I can think about. One in particular, though, His name is Jesse Hogue. He's one of my students. Right now he's living over in Montana. But I've known him for, I think, 10 years. And so I met him when he was 12 or 13, something like that. And now he's in his early 20s. What occurred to me was just a few years ago when we did an interview together. I invited him to come with me on a radio interview that I had. We gave him some time on the show there to share about how this has all made a difference for him. And what he said really moved me. He said, well, it wasn't until I came and started really deeply connecting with nature that when I went back home as an adult, and I started hearing the birds in my backyard and in the landscape where I live, I realized I had no memory of that from my childhood. I had no memory of the landscape and the birds in that landscape from my childhood. It was as if there was a blank canvas there. And he almost got teary-eyed when he said it. And that made me realize how even a small difference, it's what I call small step, big impact. Right? It was just a small little thing, but it made a huge impact for him. Day in and day out, him going to a sit spot or connected with nature in all these different ways. And sometimes it had to do with the program, and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it had to do with him just being at home, going out into nature and connecting with the place and with himself. Just going through discovery and exploration in a place and asking the questions like, wow, where does this tree grow somewhere else on the land? You know, it could be any kind of a question where he's making connections, because we were really meant to connect and make certain connections. And it's really easy for the certain connections in our brain, especially when we're younger, to be cut or not even form before they need to be formed. And there's all kinds of ways in which that's happening. You know, certain connections we don't make, that nature can help us make those connections, that then leads to critical thinking skills and problem solving. Nature helps us do that. So anyway, coming back to it, when he shared that, I realized, wow, this has been worth it. Just for that makes it really worth it. And I have other students who say things like that makes a difference for me. Like I had a student once I put him out on a solo in the woods. When he came back, he said, now what would be the reason I would go out on a solo? He was kind of challenging it. He said, what would be the value of this? Why would I want to go out there and just drink water and fast and go sit in nature? It's pretty much like a long extended sit spot. That's what it really is. And now to this day, he is leading people on solos. I see, wow, he had such a turnaround. And I've had lots of students who've gone through transformational moments like that, where now they are in turn offering that to other people, what they were given.
So earlier we talked about the types of people that might be coming here to take the course. So now I'm going to ask, and you can't cheat and answer and say everyone, who do you think could most benefit from coming here? Who most needs it?
Well, two profiles come to mind, and it's not a stereotype profile. It's a profile, it looks like this. A parent could really benefit from this. And the reason why I'm thinking that is because then it will eventually get passed. Because I'm always thinking about that long-term picture of how connections can get passed on so more people can be connected. So I see parents connecting with nature is a really valuable thing, because that's just going to naturally lead to their kids getting outside and being connected with nature. And right here at my table this summer, I invited a family over who their kids come to my camps, and I talked with them about where they live. They live over in Moses Lake, Washington, with this whole conversation about Moses Lake, and I asked them about the place. And I've been there. I've spent some time in Moses Lake and explored the area, and we've even run expeditions over there in Moses Lake. So I was asking them about it, and the way the conversation unfolded was the parents came to a discovery moment of, wow, we don't make enough time to really take our kids out in nature right here in this place where we live in Moses Lake. And it wasn't a good or bad thing, you know, there wasn't any judgment. It was just an observation. Wow, we could do that though. And we were talking about, you know, what makes Moses Lake unique and what are the features of the landscape. And so it was just interesting to have this conversation where they came to a discovery of that. They are the ones with their kids every day, day in and day out, because we're not in a extended family culture anymore for everyone across the board. It's exciting that it is happening, like where I live. I have lots of friends who have grandparents who live in the same town and stuff like that. But that's not true for everyone. And so parents, it really comes down to parents. And so I think that parents could really benefit from really connecting with nature so that they can then pass that on. And also, the other one I was going to say is, the other kind of profile I was going to say is young people in terms of like young adults. And I'm thinking, I still really believe in this, that our culture is really in need of aunts and uncles and extended family. So any kinds of people that can then reach out and pass connections on to others. So I'm thinking of that profile of people like in their 20s and 30s.
I like that parent answer because I think it brings up something that's really important. I think it's very easy for parents to place their children's needs above themselves, thinking that is the best approach. And as a person that's not a parent, I'm not going to tell people how to parent right now. But what I do want to say is, I think what parents can forget is that not taking time for themselves and enriching their own lives gets passed down to their children inadvertently. So what ends up happening is children see the misery in their parent, or they see the hardship in their parent, and it becomes a lesson of what to avoid instead of seeing a success in their parent that they want to duplicate. And so part of the reason I like that answer is because it sows that seed so that the parent can then teach by example instead of becoming a cautionary tale.
I really see that nature could be a mutual bond between parent and child or grandparent and child. I do. I see that nature is our first language too. Just as much as when we're born, we have a language that we hear humans speaking, and we're learning how to speak English or Chinese or Spanish or Japanese or whatever is from humans. I really see that nature could be our first language. And so in order to speak that language, we have to spend time in it. Passing off that language of nature needs to happen by a parent or a grandparent, an extended family role, to be able to pass that off to a future generation. That's really important. So speaking the language of nature is really our first bond, just as much as, baby and child to mother. I do see that it starts that early. It really does. It starts that early that we could have that language and bond with our primary family, with nature as that first bond and that first language. I'll give you an example of that real quick, which is I had a friend come over once and she brought her 2 daughters and we were looking at this book, and it was a nature book, and we were flipping through the pages and my 2 boys were there and they were much younger at the time. Actually, I'm sorry, I only had 1 child at the time because I was on my way to having my second child. And my 1 child was 2.5. He wasn't fully speaking yet English even, but he could say some words. Right? But he wasn't fully speaking the way I'm talking right now, fully developed language. And he's still learning language. And we're looking at a page of this mother robin. She's feeding the babies in the nest. Okay. And she's got something in her mouth. It's like a little worm type insect or grub or something. And she's feeding the babies. We're commenting, wow, the mother's feeding the babies here. I said, yeah, it's this really amazing phenomena in nature that happens at this time when the babies are born and they need the parents to feed them, because the parents run off and they're getting insects and all kinds of things to feed these babies. And the babies are saying, feed me, feed me, feed me. And they're calling. And you can hear this in springtime. I hear this really loud sometimes from the nest at high distances, sometimes from different birds. The mother robin rushes in and feeds them here. And it gets them quiet for a little bit. But then they start doing it again. Feed me, feed me, feed me. And I'm telling this story to my friend and her daughters and my son. And right then, my son is hearing the story. And he looks at me and he says, feed me, feed me, feed me. And he starts pretending to be the baby bird right then. So we had some food there and I got a little snack something and I fed him. And then my friend says, oh, you're feeding the baby bird now. And it gets quiet. And then he says, feed me, feed me, feed me. And he keeps doing it, right? And so that right there That is a moment where my son is learning about the ways of nature. He's learning he's learning how to speak the language of nature. He's imitating it, which imitation is something that goes way far back. Then we're bonding all at the same time. So that's an example of how I see it happens. The language of nature is so primary and it's so essential, and it's really important for all of us to be able to speak it and then bond with each other in that language. Because language is really important.
So if there are people listening and they think now, I'm interested in this wilderness school, and maybe they're all over the country or possibly in other countries, what can they do to find out more about this school? And then what steps should they take if they want to then enroll in some capacity?
I think the best way is just to go to our website, and there's lots of free articles there that people can read. I like to make that accessible so that wherever a person lives, they can learn about nature too. So in a lot of the free articles I've written, there are ways in which we encourage and give people suggestions for how to get outside. So that is on our website, twineagles.org. Our email address is right there and phone number, and they can contact us. But really, I would recommend if a person can get on the internet and go that route, that would be the best way, no matter where you are.
Are there any other places you recommend, any other websites you recommend people check out?
There's a book I would actually recommend that lists all kinds of schools and resources in the back, and it's called Coyote's Guide. And that is a great book for getting outside. It gives you all kinds of ideas, tips, pathways for going outside and connecting with nature, where it's just you and nature. You know, there's actually lots of ways that we can get outside nowadays. Recreational and walking our dog and gardening and all those things are great. I mean, I do a lot of those things too. And there are ways we can connect with nature that just has to do with you and nature, the earth, right there. That's also really important because, again, we could easily be distracted by all the gear and all the things that we need. Just walk outside. It just takes a few footsteps to get started.
Before we wrap it up, is there anything that we haven't discussed or any final thought you'd really like to leave the listener with before we go?
Nature changes people. And the more time that we invest in this relationship with nature, the more nature will give back to us and invest in us. There is a reciprocity that happens there. But we have to be willing to be changed by connecting. I really do know that nature changes people. Well, it almost makes it sound like we're not nature, but I don't want to get philosophical again. We are that which we want to connect with.
So nature changes you into the you that you're meant to be, in a sense, then.
That's right. Why have you come to earth? Do you remember? Why have you taken birth? Do you remember? To love, serve and remember. 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 Why have you come to earth? Do you remember? Why have you taken birth? Why have you come to love, serve and remember? To love, serve and remember. To love, serve and remember. To love, serve and remember.
Repeat listeners know what time it is. That's right, it's time to head on over to the website, gogetoutside.com/podcast. Look for episode 42 with Jeannine Tidwell. And there you're going to find today's show notes, along with photographs of the Twin Eagles Wilderness School and a variety of links. Links to twineagles.org, links to Tom Brown Jr. School. You may remember she spoke about receiving training from him and learning a lot from his books. And she also mentioned Coyote's Guide, so there will be links to that as well. Go ahead and drop us a line. Send us an email, go@butcherbirdstudios.com. Let us know what you think about this episode, other episodes, or whatever thoughts you have. Or if you just need to talk to someone, if you feel a little lonely, you can send us an email there too. Maybe you don't like email. Maybe you think after listening to today's episode and thinking about how you need to reconnect with nature, that maybe you need to break some ties with your cell phone, your laptop, whatever device is keeping you separate from society. Well, you can go back and use some ancient technology and give us a call, 818-925-0106. That is our Google voicemail. You can leave us a message up to 3 minutes. And if you are just so enamored with this show after listening to this episode and you would like to hear more, then head on over to Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, whatever place you go to for a podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the show, and then do us a huge favor if you would, rate and review the show, and share it. Share it with somebody you think might enjoy it, or someone who you think could use a little push into the outdoors. Next time on the show, Nick Smolinski of Rogue Panda Designs. He's another person from the road trip. I met him at his workspace in Flagstaff, Arizona. He is a bike packer who decided to start making his own bike packs out of his home, and it eventually turned into a fully operational business with employees and everything. So come back December 16th for the history of Rogue Panda Designs and the stories of Nick Smolinski. See you then.